The B-29 Superfortress is a four-engine propeller-driven heavy bomber designed by Boeing that was flown primarily by the United States toward the end of World War II and during the Korean War. It was one of the largest aircraft to have seen service during World War II and a very advanced bomber for its time, with features such as a pressurized cabin, an electronic fire control system, and remote-controlled machine gun turrets. The name Superfortress was derived from that of his well-known predecessor, the B-17 Flying Fortress. Although designed as a high-altitude strategic bomber, and initially used in this role against the Empire of Japan, these attacks proved to be disappointing. As a result, the B-29 became the primary aircraft used in the American firebombing campaign, and was used extensively in low-altitude nighttime incendiary bombing missions. One of the B-29's final roles during World War II was carrying out the atomic bomb attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Unlike many other World War II-era bombers, the B-29 remained in service long after the war ended, with a few even being employed as flying television transmitters for the Stratovision Company. The B-29 served in various roles throughout the 1950s. The Royal Air Force flew the B-29 and used the name Washington for the type, replacing them in 1953 with the Cambridge jet bomber, and the Soviet Union produced an unlicensed reverse-engineered copy as the Tupolev-Tu-4. The B-29 was the progenitor of a series of Boeing-built bombers, transports, tankers, reconnaissance aircraft and trainers including the B-50 Superfortress, which was essentially a re-engined B-29. The type was finally retired in the early 1960s, with 3,970 aircraft in all built. While dozens of B-29s have survived through today as static displays, only one, FIFI, remains on active flying status. A transport derived from the B-29 was the C-97, first flown in 1944, followed by its commercial airliner variant, the Boeing Model 377 Stratocruiser in 1947. This bomber-to-airliner derivation was similar to the B-17/Model 307 Evolution. The tanker variant of the B-29 was introduced in 1948 as the KB-29, followed by the Model 377 derivative KC-97 introduced in 1950. A heavily modified line of outsized cargo variants of the B-29 derived Stratocruiser is the Guppy/Mini Guppy/Super Guppy, which remain in service today with operators such as NASA. Design and development. Boeing began work on pressurized long-range bombers in 1938, when, in response to a United States Army Air Corps request, it produced a design study for the Model 334, a pressurized derivative of the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress with nose-wheel undercarriage. Although the Air Corps did not have money to pursue the design, Boeing continued development with its own funds as a private venture, so that when, in December 1939, the Air Corps issued a formal specification for a so-called superbomber, capable of delivering 20,000 lb of bombs to a target 2,667 mi away and capable of flying at a speed of 400 mph, they formed a starting point for Boeing's response. Boeing submitted its Model 345 on May 11, 1940, in competition with designs from Consolidated Aircraft, Lockheed, and Douglas. Douglas and Lockheed soon abandoned work on their projects, but Boeing received an order for 2 flying prototypes, given the designation XB-29, and an airframe for static testing on August 24, 1940, with the order being revised to add a 3rd flying aircraft on December 14. Consolidated continued to work on its Model 33 as it was seen by the Air Corps as a backup in case of problems with Boeing's design. An initial production order for 14 service test aircraft and 250 production bombers was placed in May 1941, this being increased to 500 aircraft in January 1942. The B-29 featured a fuselage design with circular cross-section for strength. The need for pressurization in the cockpit area also led to the B-29 having the only stepless cockpit design, without a separate windscreen for the pilot, on an American combat aircraft of World War II. Manufacturing the B-29 was a complex task. It involved 4 main assembly factories, a pair of Boeing-operated plants at Renton, Washington, and Wichita, Kansas, a Bell plant at Marietta, Georgia, and a Martin plant at Omaha, Nebraska. Thousands of subcontractors were involved in the project. The first prototype made its maiden flight from Boeing Field, Seattle on September 21, 1942. Because of the aircraft's highly advanced design, challenging requirements, and immense pressure for production, development was deeply troubled. The second prototype, which, unlike the unarmed first, was fitted with a Sperry defensive armament system using remote control gun turrets sighted by periscopes, first flew on December 30, 1942, this flight being terminated due to a serious engine fire. On February 18, 1943, the second prototype experienced an engine fire and crashed. Changes to the production craft came so often and so fast that in early 1944, B-29s flew from the production lines directly to modification depots for extensive rebuilds to incorporate the latest changes. The use of Euro-operated modification depots struggled to cope with the scale of work required, with the lack of hangars capable of housing the B-29 combined with freezing cold weather further delaying the modification, such that at the end of 1943, although almost 100 aircraft had been delivered, only 15% were airworthy. This prompted an intervention by General Hap Arnold to resolve the problem, with production personnel being sent from the factories to the modification centers to speed modification of sufficient aircraft to equip the first bomb groups in what became known as the Battle of Kansas. This resulted in 150 aircraft being modified in the 6 weeks between March 10 and April 15, 1944. The most common cause of maintenance headaches and catastrophic failures were the engines. Although the Writer 3350 duplex cyclone radial engines later became a trustworthy workhorse in large piston-engined aircraft, early models were beset with dangerous reliability problems. This problem was not fully cured until the aircraft was fitted with the more powerful Pratt & Whitney AW4360 Wasp Major in the B-29 DB-50 program, which arrived too late for World War II. Interim measures included cuffs placed on propeller blades to divert a greater flow of cooling air into the intakes, which had baffles installed to direct a stream of air onto the exhaust valves. Oil flow to the valves was also increased, asbestos baffles installed around rubber pushrod fittings to prevent oil loss, thorough pre-flight inspections made to detect unseated valves, and frequent replacement of the uppermost 5 cylinders in the entire engines. Pilots, including the present-day pilots of the commemorative Air Force Euro-1 registered trademark S5E, the last remaining flying B-29, described flight after takeoff as being an urgent struggle for airspeed. Radial engines need airflow to keep them cool, and failure to get up to speed as soon as possible could result in an engine failure and risk of fire. One useful technique was to check the magnetos while already on takeoff roll rather than during a conventional static engine run-up before takeoff. In wartime, the B-29 was capable of flight at altitudes up to 31,850 feet, at speeds of up to 350 mph. This was its best defense, because Japanese fighters could barely reach that altitude, and few could catch the B-29 even if they did attain that altitude. Only the heaviest of anti-aircraft weapons could reach it, and since the Axis forces did not have proximity fuses, hitting or damaging the aircraft from the ground in combat proved difficult. The B-29's revolutionary central fire control system included 4 remotely controlled turrets armed with 2.50 Browning M2 machine guns each. All weapons were aimed electronically from 5 sighting stations located in the nose and tail positions and 3 perspex blisters in the central fuselage. 5 General Electric analog computers increased the weapon's accuracy by compensating for factors such as airspeed, lead, gravity, temperature and humidity. The computers also allowed a single gunner to operate 2 or more turrets simultaneously. The gunner in the upper position acted as fire control officer, managing the distribution of turrets among the other gunners during combat. In early 1945, with a change of role from high-altitude day bomber to low-altitude night bomber, LeMay reportedly ordered the removal of most of the defensive armament and remote-controlled sighting equipment from his B-29 so that they could carry greater fuel and bomb loads. As a consequence of this requirement, Bell Marietta produced a series of 311 B-29Bs that had turrets and sighting equipment removed, except for the tail position, which initially had the 2.50 calories Browning machine guns and single M2 cannon with the APG-15 radar fitted as standard. This armament was quickly changed to 3.50 caliber Brownings. This version also had an improved APQ-7 Eagle bombing through overcast radar fitted in an airfoil-shaped radome under the fuselage. Most of these aircraft were assigned to the 315th Bomb Wing, Northwest Field, Guam. The crew enjoyed, for the first time in a bomber, full pressurization comfort. This first-ever cabin pressure system for an Allied production bomber was developed for the B-29 by Garrett I Research. The nose and the cockpit were pressurized, but the designers were faced with deciding whether to have bomb bays that were not pressurized, between fore and aft pressurized sections, or a fully pressurized fuselage with the need to depressurize to drop their loads. The decision was taken to have a long tunnel over the two bomb bays so that crews could crawl back and forth between the fore and aft sections, with both areas and the tunnel pressurized. The bomb bays were not pressurized. Operational history: World War II. The initial plan, implemented at the direction of President Franklin D. Roosevelt as a promise to China and called Operation Matterhorn, was to use B-29s to attack Japan from 4 forward bases in southern China, with 5 main bases in India, and to attack other targets in the region from China and India as needed. The Xiongnu region was eventually chosen over the Guilin region to avoid having to raise, equip, and train 50 Chinese divisions to protect the advanced bases from Japanese ground attack. The 20-bomber command, initially intended to be 2 combat wings of 4 groups each, was reduced to a single wing of 4 groups because of the lack of availability of aircraft, automatically limiting the effectiveness of any attacks from China. This was an extremely costly scheme, as there was no overland connection available between India and China, and all supplies had to be flown over the Himalayas either by transport aircraft or by the B-29s themselves, with some aircraft being stripped of armor and guns and used to deliver fuel. B-29s started to arrive in India in early April 1944. The first B-29 flight to airfields in China took place on April 24, 1944. The first B-29 combat mission was flown on June 5, 1944, with 77 out of 98 B-29s launched from India bombing the railroad shops in Bangkok and elsewhere in Thailand. 5 B-29s were lost during the mission, none to hostile fire. Ford Base in China, on June 5, 1944, B-29s raided Bangkok, in what is reported as a test before being deployed against the Japanese home islands. Sources do not report from where they launched, and vary as to the numbers in Velveeta Euro 77, 98, and 114 being claimed. Targets were Bangkok's Memorial Bridge and a major power plant. Bombs fell over 2 kilometers away, damaged no civilian structures, but destroyed some tram lines and destroyed both a Japanese military hospital and the Japanese secret police headquarters. On June 15, 1944, 68 B-29s took off from bases around Xiongnu, 47 of which reached and bombed the Imperial Iron and Steel Works at Yamagata, Japan. This was the first attack on Japanese islands since the Doolittle raid in April 1942. The first B-29 combat losses occurred during this raid, with 1 B-29 destroyed on the ground by Japanese fighters after an emergency landing in China, 1 lost to anti-aircraft fire over Yawata, and another, the Stockett's rocket B-29-1 BW-42-62-61, disappeared after takeoff from Shakulia, India, over the Himalayas. Source: 20th Bomb Group ASSN. This raid, which did little damage to the target, with only 1 bomb striking the target factory complex, nearly exhausted fuel stocks at the Xiongnu B-29 bases, resulting in a slowdown of operations until the fuel stockpiles could be replenished. Starting in July, the raids against Japan from Chinese airfields continued at relatively low intensity. Japan was bombed on July 7, 1944, July 29, August 10, August 20, September 8, September 26, October 25, November 12, November 21, December 19 and for the last time on January 6, 1945. The tactic of using aircraft to ram American B-29s was first recorded on raid of August 20, 1944 on the steel factories at Yawata. Sergeant Shigeo Nobi of the 4th Sentai intentionally flew his Kawasaki Ki-45 into a B-29. Debris from the explosion following this attack severely damaged another B-29, which also went down. Lost were Colonel Robert Clinksale's B-29-10 BW-42-6334 Gertrude C. and Captain Ornell Stauffer's B-29-15 BW-42-6368 Calamity Sue, both from the 486th Berg. Several B-29s were destroyed in this way over the ensuing months. Although the term kamikaze is often used to refer to the pilots conducting these attacks, the word was not used by the Japanese military. B-29s were withdrawn from airfields in China by the end of January 1945. Throughout this prior period, B-29 raids were also launched from China and India against many other targets throughout Southeast Asia, including a series of raids on Singapore and Thailand. On November 2, 1944, 55 B-29s raided Bangkok's Bang Sue marshalling yards in the largest raid of the war. 7 RTAF Nakajima Ki-43 Hayabusa's from Phoolan Bin 16 and 14 IJAAF Ki-43s attempted intercept. RTAF Flat Lieutenant Thadsak Arasap attacked a B-29, damaging it, but was shot down by return fire. One B-29 was lost, possibly the one damaged by FLT Lieutenant Thadsak. On April 14, 1945, a second B-29 raid on Bangkok destroyed 2 key power plants, and was the last major attack conducted against Thai targets. The B-29 effort was gradually shifted to the new bases in the Mariana Islands in the Central Pacific, with the last B-29 combat mission from India flown on March 29, 1945. New Mariana Islands air bases, in addition to the logistical problems associated with operations from China, the B-29 could only reach a limited part of Japan while flying from Chinese bases. The solution to this problem was to capture the Mariana Islands, which would bring targets such as Tokyo, about 1,500 mi north of the Marianas within range of B-29 attacks. It was therefore agreed in December 1943 to seize the Marianas. Saipan was invaded by U.S. forces on June 15, 1944, and despite a Japanese naval counterattack which led to the Battle of the Philippine Sea and heavy fighting on land, was secured by July 9. Operations followed against Guam and Tinian, with all 3 islands secured by August. Work began at once to construct air bases suitable for the B-29, work beginning even before the end of ground fighting. In all, 5 major airfields were built, with 2 on the flat island of Tinian, 1 on Saipan, and 2 on Guam. Each was large enough to eventually accommodate a bomb wing consisting of 4 bomb groups, giving a total of 180 B-29s per airfield. These bases, which could be supplied by ship, and unlike the bases in China, were not vulnerable to attacks by Japanese ground forces, became the launch sites for the large B-29 raids against Japan in the final year of the war. The first B-29 arrived on Saipan on October 12, 1944, and the first combat mission was launched from there on October 28, 1944, with 14 B-29s attacking the Truk Atoll. The first mission against Japan from bases in the Marianas was flown on November 24, 1944, with 111 B-29s sent to attack Tokyo, with 73rd Bomb Wing Commander Brigadier General Emmett O'Donnell, Jr. as mission command pilot in B-29 Dauntless Dottie, the first attack on the capital since the Doolittle raid in April 1942. From that point, raids intensified, launched regularly until the end of the war. These attacks succeeded in devastating almost all large Japanese cities, and they gravely damaged Japan's war industries. Although less publicly appreciated, the mining of Japanese ports and shipping routes carried out by B-29s from April 1945 significantly affected Japan's ability to support its population and move its troops. The atomic bombs, perhaps the most famous B-29 is the Enola Gay, which dropped the atomic bomb Little Boy on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, and is presently preserved and on display at the Smithsonian Stephen F. Vorhazy Center. Boxcar, another B-29, dropped Fat Man on Nagasaki 3 days later, and is preserved and on display at the National Museum of the United States Air Force. These two actions, along with the Soviet invasion of Manchuria on August 9, 1945, brought about the Japanese surrender, and the official end of World War II. Both aircraft were hand-picked for modification from the assembly line at the Omaha plant that was to become Offutt Air Force Base. Following the surrender of Japan, VJ Day, B-29s were used for other purposes. A number supplied POWs with food and other necessities by dropping barrels of rations on Japanese POW camps. In September 1945, a long-distance flight was undertaken for public relations purposes. Generals Barney M. Giles, Curtis LeMay and Emmett O'Donnell, Jr. piloted 3 specially modified B-29s from Chitus Air Base in Hokkaido to Chicago Municipal Airport, continuing to Washington, D.C., the farthest non-stop distance to the date flown by U.S. Army Air Forces aircraft and the first ever non-stop flight from Japan to the U.S. 2 months later, Colonel Clarence S. Irving commanded another modified B-29, Pachysandrine boat, in a world record-breaking long-distance flight from Guam to Washington, D.C., traveling 7,916 miles in 35 hours, with a gross takeoff weight of 155,000 pounds. Almost a year later, in October 1946, the same B-29 flew 9,422 miles non-stop from Oahu, Hawaii to Cairo, Egypt in less than 40 hours, further proving the capability of routing airlines over the polar ice cap. B-29s in Europe and Australia. Although considered for other theatres, and briefly evaluated in England, the B-29 was exclusively used in World War II in the Pacific Theatre. The use of YB-29 BW-41 to 36,393, the so-named Hobo Queen, one of the service test aircraft flown around several British airfields in early 1944, was thought to be as a disinformation program intended to deceive the Germans into believing that the B-29 would be deployed to Europe. Post-war, several RAF bomber command squadrons were equipped with B-29s loaned from USAF stocks. The aircraft were known as the Washington B-1 in RAF service, and remained in service from March 1950 until the last bombers were returned in early 1954, having been replaced by deliveries of the English electric Canberra bombers. 3 Washingtons modified for ELINT duties and a standard bomber version used for support by No. 192 Squadron RAF were decommissioned in 1958, being replaced by de Havilland Comet aircraft. 2 British Washington B-1 aircraft were transferred to the Royal Australian Air Force in 1952 and flown to Australia. They were attached to the Aircraft Research and Development Unit and used in trials conducted on behalf of the British Ministry of Supply. Both aircraft were placed in storage in 1956 and were sold for scrap the next year. Soviet copying of the B-29. During 1944 and 1945, 5 B-29s made emergency landings in Soviet territory after bombing raids on Japanese Manchuria and Japan. In accordance with Soviet neutrality in the Pacific War, the bombers were interned and kept by the Soviets, despite American requests for their return, and were, instead, used by the Soviets as a pattern for the Tupolev to fall. On July 31, 1944, Ramp-Tramp of the 462nd Bomb Group was diverted to Vladivostok, Russia after an engine failed and the propeller could not be feathered. This B-29 was part of a 100-aircraft raid against the Japanese Showa steel mill in Anshan, Manchuria. On August 20, 1944, K-8 Palmat, flying from Shiund, was damaged by anti-aircraft gunfire during a raid on the Yawata Iron Works. Due to the damage sustained, the crew elected to divert to the Soviet Union. The aircraft crashed in the foothills of Sakhalin Range east of Khabarovsk after the crew bailed out. On November 11, 1944, during a night raid on Omura on Kyushu, Japan, the General H. H. Arnold Special was damaged and forced to divert to Vladivostok in the Soviet Union. The crew was interned. On November 21, 1944, Ding Hao was damaged during a raid on an aircraft factory at Omura, Japan, and was also forced to divert to Vladivostok. The interned crews of these 4 B-29s were allowed to escape into American-occupied Iran in January 1945, but none of the B-29s were returned after Stalin ordered the Tupolev OKB to examine and copy the B-29, and produce a design ready for quantity production as soon as possible. Because aluminum in the USSR was supplied in different gauges to those available in the US, the entire aircraft had to be extensively re-engineered. In addition, Tupolev substituted his own favored airfoil sections for those used by Boeing, with the Soviets themselves already having their own Wright R-1820 derived 18-cylinder radial engine. The shafts of AH-73 of comparable power and displacement to the B-29's duplex Cyclone radials available to power their B-29 clone aircraft. In 1947, the Soviets debuted both the Tupolev Tu-4 and the Tupolev Tu-70 transport variant. The Soviets used tailgunner positions similar to the B-29 in many later bombers and transports. Between wars, while the end of World War II caused production of the B-29 to be phased out, with the last example completed by Boeing's Renton factory on May 28, 1946, and with many aircraft sent for storage and ultimately scrapping as surplus to requirements, the remaining B-29s formed the combat equipment of Strategic Air Command when it formed on March 21, 1946. In particular, the silver plate modified aircraft of the 509th Composite Group remained the only aircraft capable of delivering the atomic bomb, and so the unit was involved in the Operation Crossroads series of tests, with B-29 Dave's Dream dropping a Fat Man-type bomb in Test Able on July 1, 1946. The B-29s were outfitted with filtered air sampling scoops and monitored debris from above-ground nuclear weapons testing by the United States and the USSR. The aircraft were also used for long-range weather reconnaissance and for signals intelligence gathering and photographic reconnaissance. Korean War and post-war service. The B-29 was used in 1950–53 in the Korean War. At first, the bomber was used in normal strategic day bombing missions, though North Korea's few strategic targets and industries were quickly reduced to rubble. More importantly, in 1950 numbers of Soviet MiG-15 Fagot jet fighters appeared over Korea, and after the loss of 28 aircraft, future B-29 raids were restricted to night-only missions, largely in a supply interdiction role. Over the course of the war, B-29s flew 20,000 sorties and dropped 200,000 tons of bombs. B-29 gunners were credited with shooting down 27 enemy aircraft. The B-29 was notable for dropping the large Raisin and Tatsun radio control bomb in Korea, mostly for demolishing major bridges, like the ones across the Yalu River, and for attacks on dams. The aircraft also was used for numerous leaflet drops in North Korea, such as those for Operation Mola. A Superfortress of the 91st Strategic Reconnaissance Squadron flew the last B-29 mission of the war on July 27, 1953. Over the 3 years 16 B-29 and reconnaissance variants were lost to North Korean fighters, 4 to anti-aircraft fire and 14 to other operational causes. The B-29 was soon made obsolete by the development of the jet-engined fighter aircraft. With the arrival of the Mammoth Convair B-36, the B-29 was reclassified as a medium bomber by the Air Force. However, the later B-50 Superfortress variant was good enough to handle auxiliary roles such as air-sea rescue, electronic intelligence gathering, air-to-air refueling, and weather reconnaissance. The B-50D was replaced in its primary role during the early 1950s by the Boeing B-47 Stratojet, which in turn was replaced by the Boeing B-52 Superfortress. The final active-duty variants were phased out in the mid-1960s. A total of 3,970 B-29s were built. Variants. Unlike many other aircraft designed to play a similar role, the variants of the B-29 were all essentially the same. The developments made between the first prototype XB-29 and any of the 3 versions flown in combat were all minuscule, excluding the silver plate models built for the Manhattan Project. The biggest differences were between variants modified for non-bomber missions. In addition to acting as cargo carriers, rescue aircraft, weather ships and trainers. Some were used for odd purposes such as flying relay television transmitters under the name of Stratovision. An example of a later variant of the B-29, the B-50 Superfortress Pratt & Whitney R4360-35 Wasp major engines, acted as the mothership for experimental parasite fighter aircraft, such as the McDonnell X-F-85 Goblin and Republic F-84 Thunderjets as in-flight lock-on and offs. It was also used to develop the Airborne Early Warning Program. It was the ancestor of various modern radar picket aircraft. A B-29 with the original Wright duplex Cyclone power plants was used to air-launch the famous Bell X-1 supersonic research rocket aircraft, as well as Cherokee rockets for the testing of ejection seats. Some B-29s were modified to act as test beds for various new systems or special conditions, including fire control systems, cold weather operations, and various armament configurations. Several converted B-29s were used to experiment with aerial refueling and redesignated as KB-29s. Perhaps the most important tests were conducted by the XB-29G. It carried prototype jet engines in its bomb bay, and lowered them into the airstream to conduct measurements. Operators: Australia, Royal Australian Air Force, a United Kingdom, Royal Air Force, a United States, United States Army Air Forces, United States Air Force, United States Navy, a Soviet Union, Soviet Air Forces, survivors. 22 B-29s are preserved at various museums worldwide, including one flying example. FIFI, which belongs to the Commemorative Air Force, along with 4 complete airframes either in storage or under restoration, 8 partial airframes in storage or under restoration, and 4 known wreck sites. Only 2 of the 22 museum aircraft are outside the United States. One is in the American Air Museum at the Imperial War Museum Duford in the United Kingdom, the other at the Kai Aerospace Museum in Sakan, South Korea. One is the B-29 Sweet Eloise at Dobbins Air Reserve Base in Georgia, which flew 27 successful bombing missions mainly over Japan during the Second World War, and 5 POW relief missions. There is a restored B-29, Jack's Hack, located as part of the 58th Bomb Wing Memorial at the New England Air Museum in Windsor Locks, CT. Finally, the Enola Gay, the B-29 that dropped the first atomic bomb, was fully restored and placed on display at the Smithsonian Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Air and Space Museum near Washington Dulles International Airport in 2003. Similarly, the weapons delivery aircraft for the Nagasaki raid deploying the Fat Man, the Boxcar, is restored and on display at the National Museum of the United States Air Force at Wright-Patterson AFB in Dayton, Ohio. Accidents and incidents. Notable B-29 accidents and incidents include a crash of the plane near Clovis, New Mexico on Friday evening, November 10, 1944, wherein all 15 members of the crew were killed. 1948 Waycross B-29 crash, which resulted in the United States v. Reynolds lawsuit regarding state secrets privilege, the 1948 Lake Mead Boeing B-29 crash and the 1953 Tiptoe crash. Another well-known crash took place in 1946 near Clingman's Dome on the border of North Carolina and Tennessee. On April 11, 1950, a B-29 departed Kirtland Air Force Base at 9:38 p.m. and crashed into a mountain on Manzano Base approximately 3 minutes later, killing the crew. Detonators were installed in the bomb on the aircraft. The bomb case was demolished and some high-explosive material burned in the gasoline fire. Other pieces of unburned HE were scattered throughout the wreckage. 4 spare detonators and their carrying case were recovered undamaged. There were no contamination or recovery problems. The recovered components were returned to the Atomic Energy Commission. Both the weapon and the capsule of nuclear material were on board the aircraft, but the capsule was not inserted for safety reasons. A nuclear detonation was not possible. Specifications, data from Quest for Performance, general characteristics, crew, 11, length, 99 feet 0 inches, wingspan, 141 feet 3 in, height, 27 feet 9 in, wing area, 1,736 square feet, aspect ratio, 11.50, empty weight, 74,500 pounds, loaded weight, 120,000 pounds, max takeoff weight, 133,500 lba. 135,000 pounds plus combat load, power plant, Fora, Writer 3350-23 and 23A duplex cyclone turbo supercharged radial engines, 2,200 horsepower each, 0 lift drag coefficient, 0.0241, drag area, 41.16 FTA squared, performance, maximum speed, 357 miles per hour, cruise speed, 220 miles per hour, stall speed, 105 miles per hour, combat range, 3,250 miles, ferry range, 5,600 miles, service ceiling, 31,850 feet, rate of climb, 900 feet per minute, wing loading, 69.12 pounds SQFT, power mass, 0.073 horsepower per pound, lift-to-drag ratio, 16.8, armament, guns, tenor, .50 in Browning M2/ANs in remote-controlled turrets to a .50 BMG and 1 20mm M2 cannon in tail position. Bombs, 20,000 pounds standard loadout. See also: Air warfare of World War II, silver plater the atom bomb dedicated B-29 version, Boeing B-29 Superfortress variants, Boxcar, Enola Gay, FIFI, Keybird, Straight Flush, ANAPQ-13, United States v. Reynolds, ASMA-1 Tatson, related development, Boeing KB-29, Boeing XB-39 Superfortress, Boeing XB-44 Superfortress, Boeing B-50 Superfortress, Boeing C-97 Stratofreighter, Boeing 377, two-polar to 4, aircraft of comparable role, configuration and era, Avro Lancaster, America Bomber, Consolidated B-32 Dominator, Douglas XB-31, Heinkel He-277, Junkers Ju-390, Lockheed XB-30, Messerschmitt Me-264, Victory Bomber, related lists, list of aircraft of World War II, list of bomber aircraft, list of military aircraft of the United States, references, notes. Citations. Bibliography. External links, B-29 Combat Crew Manual, Meet the B-29, Popular Science, August 1944 the first large and detailed public article printed on the B-29 in the USA, National Museum B-29 Superfortress official fact sheet retrieved, August 11, 2007. 330th Berg, 330th, 20th AF, 314th BW, 330th Bomb Group official history and first-hand accounts, 315th BW at Guam, 20th AF, photographs, history, first-hand accounts, reunion information, B-29 DOC restoration project, the restoration of dock, bombers over Japan, development, photos, and history, Pelican's Perch No. 56, Superfortress. Article wrote by John Deakin, one of the pilots who regularly fly the world's only remaining flyable B-29, warbirdsregistry.org B-29 per byte 50, listing of surviving B-29s, annotated bibliography on the B-29 from the ALSO's Digital Library, Great Engines and Great Planes, 1947 a Euro 130-page book about the rapid design, testing, and production of the B-29 power plant by Chrysler Corporation in World War II, T-Square 54, The Last B-29 website, by Tom Mathewson, B-29 flight procedure and combat crew functioning, 1944 U.S. Army Air Forces training film on YouTube, B-29 and B-50 production batches and serial numbers, Washington Times.